I have the great privilege of talking about Satyajit Ray on his birth centenary year for the Cultural Department of the Alliance Française of Pondicherry. I'll begin by saying that he was a man of great achievements. He did a lot of interesting things, but how to place him, how to make you understand how high he went, what was the maximum stature he achieved. To tell you that, I'll have to tell you what kind of awards he was given, because he was given many, many awards by many institutions. But I'll take 3 of the highest so that you can place him at the height at which he was. Firstly, he was honored with the Légion d'honneur by the French government. Then he was given the Bharat Ratna honor by the Indian government, which is the highest civilian honor in India. And thirdly, he received an Oscar award for the totality of his work, almost at the very end of his life. These 3 awards can make you understand the heights that he reached. But how did he become the director that he became? We have to go back and see what were the influences that created this extraordinary filmmaker. No artist, no filmmaker, no writer becomes what he is just like that. There are lots of influences, the milieu in which they grow up, their education, their family, the events that happen during their lifetimes. These things influence the creator, and when he expresses himself, all this is behind him. So let's see how really he became who he was. First of all, let's talk about his birth. He was born in 1921, just a couple of years after the end of the First World War, in Calcutta. At that time, India was a part of the British Empire. So, in fact, Satyajit Ray was born in British India. At that time, a well-educated Indian, or let's say a well-educated Bengali, from a well-to-do family, had a great opening and a great connection with the British culture. In fact, a very well-educated Bengali was almost an Englishman. So, Satyajit Ray grew up in this India, in this Calcutta, which had a fantastic double culture. There was the British culture all around, as well as a very high Indian culture. He had this double culture, which gave him an opening on the world, which was one of the important points which made him who he was. In one of his interviews, he says, "I am a product of the East and the West." This itself shows that he was quite different from all the others. He grew up in pre-independent India. He was born a good 25 years before Indian independence. So he saw a lot of things happening. And in that world, which was very different from ours. And then his family was a very special family. His father's father, his maternal grandfather, was called Upendra Kishore Ray, and he was a very well-to-do man. He owned a printing press, which was known as the best in Asia, very advanced in technology for that time. his grandfather was himself a very literary man, a very artistic man, he was a musician. And then Satyajit Ray's father, Nicola Macé, was a very well-known writer. Nicola Macé was a writer on his own credit. He was a very well-known poet of comic poetry. His poems were full of puns, irony, humor, and even today, every child who grows up in West Bengal knows his Nicola Macé. There is no one who lives in West Bengal who has not heard of Nicola Macé. So, such a famous father had such a famous son, but there's a catch. One would imagine that, if he was the son of Nicola Macé, the great writer, he must have been influenced by him, inspired by him, encouraged by him. But that was not the case at all, because Nicola Macé died when Satyajit Ray was barely 2 years old. So in fact, Satyajit never knew his father. He said that he knew his father in the same way that everyone knew his father, through his writings. Just the way everybody knows Nicola Macé through his poems, his son too knew him through his writings, through his prose, through his poetry, but he didn't know him as a person. Now at that point, his life evidently was completely changed. His widowed mother went to live with her own brother, and she worked to financially support herself and her son, because at the time when Satyajit Ray's father died, they had to pay a lot of debts and they had to sell off the printing press and all their assets, their house, etc. And so, as they had no money, they went and lived with his maternal uncle, and that's where he grew up. This again is a factor, that he was an only child of a widowed mother. Probably he spent long hours alone. He must have been quite a lonely child, but that gave him the opportunity to read, to reflect, to observe, to cultivate his mind, and to grow. At the same time, he was surrounded by this extended family of his maternal uncle, which was a very literary family. It was a very artistic family, very cultured family. There were many musicians and singers in this family. They must have discussed artists and artistic works. So this discussion, cultural discussions were all the time around him. And that also nurtured him to a great extent. The other influence, which was very strong, is that when he finished his studies, his graduation, his mother absolutely insisted that he goes to Shantiniketan and that he studies art. So he went to Shantiniketan and he took a course in art and art appreciation. He learned to draw and paint with one of the finest artists of his days. The great artist Nandalal Bose was one of his teachers. And to grow up and to spend time in a place like Shantiniketan, which again was a place of great cultural activities, artists all around him, writers, and founded by and headed by Rabindranath Tagore, who, as we know, is the only Indian who was given a Nobel Prize for Literature. To have grown up in that ambiance was something very important. And this art course that he did was really the foundation on which his filmmaking career stands, because he understood the importance of an image. he knew what an image was, how powerful it was, what it could do to a person who was looking at it. This was the grounding. Once he finished that, he took up a job in an advertising agency. It was actually a British advertising agency because India was not yet independent. And he started working there. And then this company sent him to London to their head office, possibly to learn his trade better. We don't know if Satyajit Ray himself asked for it or they chose to send him. However, he went to spend 6 months in London. And this was really a turning point. Once he reached London, he saw a film almost every day. He saw 100 films in 6 months, the best films possible, which were available at that time. And he just soaked in this extraordinary milieu of the cinema. And by the time he had spent the 6 months, he had almost like a filmmaking course. This exposure to good cinema, to world cinema, was really the turning point. It is said that when he came out of the cinema, having watched Vittorio Sica's Bicycle Thief, he made up his mind to be a filmmaker. That was what had moved him so deeply, that film, Bicycle Thief, that he took that decision. Then when he came back to Calcutta, he started a film society with his friends, and where they discussed good films, international films, and so on. And then the next thing that happened was that he got an opportunity to work with Jean Renoir, who came to Calcutta to make his film, The River. And once he came and landed in Calcutta, Jean Renoir actually recruited a group of local technicians to work on his project. And so Satyajit Ray introduced himself and requested Renoir if he could work with him as an assistant. The intention evidently was that he wanted to learn the practical aspects of filmmaking, and Renoir agreed, and that's how he started working on that shoot. And he picked up all the practical details, the actual way in which a film is made. He learned everything on the spot. And already at that time, he had in mind the idea of making a film. This Portrait Panchali was already in his mind. By that time, he had started working for a publishing house, and he used to design book covers. And the book on which this film is based was one of the books that he was designing a cover for, and he read the book and he liked it so much, he thought he would make a film on that. So the idea was already there, and he spoke to Jean Renoir about it, who encouraged him. And so he worked on this shoot and learned all the technical and practical details. Not only that, but on this shoot he met 2 people who went on to become part of his team later on. So he made even contacts within this group. And that again helped him tremendously. Now I have to just make another aside and tell you something else which I skipped, but which cannot be ignored, which is his marriage to Bijoya. Before he started working in the advertising agency, in fact, he had already started working. Around that time, he had fallen in love with Bijoya, who was actually his cousin. They were cousins because his mother was the half-sister of her father. They had one common grandfather, but not a common grandmother. His mother and her father were half-brother and sister. But as it happens in Bengali families, in Indian families, cousins are always around you, and they used to very often go and watch films together. They would sit and discuss Western classical music together. They would have share books together, and so they developed this fantastic intellectual companionship, which was what Satyajit Ray needed. And their relationship grew and grew. Nobody actually doubted because everyone knew they were cousins, so okay, they're going to watch a film together, very good. They would often tell Vijay, take Manik along. Manik was his family nickname, so that you don't go alone, and so on. And in this way, they fell in love. And then Vijaya wanted to go to Bombay and try her hand at acting. She was actually a very good singer, but for some reason, she didn't want to make a career out of that. Anyway, she went to Bombay. As you know, there were a lot of Bengalis making films in Bombay at that time. One of these people took her along, and she did act in a few films as not as the heroine, but as a side character. And then slowly and slowly, she saw that the career was not going anywhere. She understood she couldn't make it there. Coming back to Calcutta, what would she do? And there was the problem of money. She didn't have enough money, and that's when Satyajit Ray proposed that he would financially help her, at which point they started discussing their future together and their marriage. They knew that it would shock his mother. But anyway, once they took the decision, they got married. They asked somebody to convince his mother to accept them, and then they came back to Calcutta, and they already had a civilian marriage, but they had a religious marriage as well, and his mother eventually accepted her. Eventually, of course, as the day they got married, she accepted her. And Vijaya was really a tremendous influence, a very, very close associate. She worked with him. She read all his scenarios, all his scripts that he wrote. He first showed it to her. She gave him her feedback. She was always around during the shoots. She helped with the costumes, etc., for the women characters. And most importantly, she took care of the household where Satyajit Ray had to do absolutely nothing. She absolutely took charge of the house, did everything so that he could be free to do what he wanted to do. And so this person who was always standing beside him, helping him, supporting him in every way, was a silent influence that probably many people don't know, but it was there, and it was a very big help for him. So then his first film was Pather Panjali, which was based on an already published book. But it was very difficult for him to start off because evidently he was an unknown person, and starting things is always difficult, especially getting the money for it. Anyway, with great difficulty, he did manage to get the money, etc. With that started a new kind of movement. It was something that Indian cinema had not seen up till then. When he started making films, his first film in 1955, it is said that it was for the first time that true, pure cinema came to India. Because before this, filmmaking in India was mostly storytelling. It was a story that was being told through images. The important thing was the story, and mostly these films were like a stage play that was being filmed by a camera. So the acting was very theatrical, the sets were very theatrical, everything was very theatrical, and it was like a camera was recording a play, mostly. Or that the importance was on the story and how it went forward. But with Satyajit Ray's Pather Panjali came this neorealist kind of style of cinematic moments. A story told with images where the emotion is expressed through images, the sequence of images, a moment which is caught by the camera, which is true to life. And in this way came this new style of filmmaking. Now you can imagine that if the Indian public had been watching this kind of films, which were basically filmed stage plays, or almost, full of entertainment, full of song, dance, etc., and strong emotions, Satyajit Ray's film was quite the opposite of that. So evidently, his films didn't make any commercial success. He could see, he was a bit disappointed, and he could see that his audience was not prepared for his kind of films. However, he wanted to make the kind of film he wanted to make. So he continued with this. With hindsight now, we can see that he had a tremendous international sensibility, a strong, even British or European sensibility, which was very different from the films which were being made by people. Let's not forget that cinema was at the time a business. It was not supposed to be an art supported by money, but money supported by art. It was basically a business. Films were made for making money. So this kind of sensibility was quite different from that. And he did have to struggle a lot, putting the money together to make his films, never being very sure whether they would be able to get back the money that had been invested. There again we see something extraordinary. Satyajit Ray used to do absolutely everything on the film shoot, on his film. Once he started the project, he was there in every department. Firstly, he wrote his own screenplays because he felt that was a very important part of the film. He wrote it himself. And then he made his own storyboard. He drew the costumes, the jewelry. He did the music himself. He sat with the editor and saw to it that it was edited the way he wanted it. In fact, because he had very limited resources to make films, he made his films which were cut on the camera. That means he shot the film in such a way that there would be minimum editing required. And then ultimately he would even stand behind the camera and he would even, make sure that the cinematography was absolutely directed by him, or sometimes he even did it himself. So every department was under his full control, which was like the whole film was created and made by him. There were also times when he would do things which needed to be done without ever asking the producer to pay him for these extra things that he was doing. His wife once asked him, "Why do you do this? Why do you do more than that is required?" And he said, "You see, I don't want the producer to lose money. My big worry is that the man who has put his money into this project should not lose his money. He should get his money back. So I want to ensure that everything is perfect. Everything is done the way it should be done. And that this doesn't become a financial burden to anyone." Now, in order to make all the uncertainties to the minimum, he also used to often repeat his actors. Satyajit Ray made 36 films, out of which, in 14 of his films, he took the actors Soumitra Chatterjee because he really got along with him. He said once we worked together on one film, Apu Shankar was the first film he worked with him, he understood that Soumitra followed his instructions very closely. They got along well, and so he said he preferred to take him for his other films because it cut out all the stress of having to explain things to a new actor. And he was assured to a great extent that Soumitra would execute what he was asking him to do correctly. So in this way, if you look at all his films, you will see there are many actors and actresses that Satyajit Ray has repeated because of this facility of working with them, and because it would ensure that there would be no uncertainties and that he was assured of a certain performance. So actresses like Sharmila Tagore comes back in many of his films. Madhav Kutty comes back in 3 or 4 of his films. Even Uttam Kumar, the big star, he has taken him twice. And so, if you watch all his films, you will notice he would work with these same actors because he felt at ease with them. He also had this extraordinary ability to work with non-professional actors, which brought about something very spontaneous. And if the character went with the actor, matched the character very well, he would take that person even if it was a non-professional. Now, the other thing which makes him such a great filmmaker, firstly, of course, the quality of his films were of a very high order, but also one of the other things that makes him such a great filmmaker is that he touched a large number of genres. He made different kinds of films, and he moved with the times. It's all his fans have watched one type of films, all of the films in that genre. There are very few people who have actually watched all his films, because each kind of film had its own fan circle. So he has made films which were set in villages. He has made films which were set in the city, Calcutta, very urban stories. He has made a series of detective films based on his own detective novels. He has made a film for children, Ruping and Bhagavan. He has made films based on historical novels. He has made films where he reflects on human nature. He has made a large variety of films. And as he was a very well-read man and he was very curious about life, he would read and update himself so that he would go forward and make films which were moving with the times. Which is why, in fact, it's very difficult to believe that we are celebrating his centenary, that if he had been alive, he would have been 100 years old, because he's so contemporary. He's so much part of contemporary discussions on cinema. The themes that he took up to talk about in his films are still so relevant that it's difficult to imagine he would have been 100 years old. And so we have this vast range of films. Once he had also said that he liked to base his scenarios, his screenplays on already published works. He has made many films based on short stories and novels which were already published. Once again with that same idea, he would say, why take a risk and take an unknown story? I'm going to make a film, I want to sell it, I want the producer to recover his cost. How to minimize the risk factor? Let me make a film on a book which is already published and already liked. So I know that I will have a certain number of people who will enjoy watching it. So he has based many of his screenplays on published works of Bengali writers. 2 of his films are based on Rabindranath Tagore's novels, Charulata and Home in the World. And then there is this series of films he has made on the detective books that he wrote. Now, I must tell you that he didn't make much money from cinema. His wife lamented that they never made enough money to be able to buy themselves a house. You know, every wife dreams of owning her own house. But Satyajit Ray, whatever money he earned would very often be spent in buying tickets to go to international film festivals, where he would be invited, and particularly the Cannes Film Festival, where he was so much appreciated, so well received, given so many awards. So he would often have to travel abroad, which in those days was very expensive. And so much of his money went either into these film festivals or into making other films. And so she says that she has written a book called My Life with Satyajit Ray. I'm getting my facts from that, where she says that they always lived in a rented flat to the end of their lives. She would often buy furniture thinking, oh, I'm going to have a new house and then I'll put this, and ultimately that house was never bought and they would continue with their life. So in fact, the main source of income that he had was the royalties he got for the books that he wrote. And so this series of detective novels based on the character Felita that he wrote got him quite a bit of money. And so he made films on his own novels. So many of his films are based on other people's works, but some of them are based on his own work. And his later films were original film scripts that he wrote himself. So this large variety of genres that he dealt with, and humor, that's something extraordinary, because as everybody knows, Indian cinema didn't have a very high standard of humor. It was usually slapstick or very cheap or very low kind of humor. But Satyajit Ray had this very fine British sense of humor, and you will see he inherited his sense of humor from his father, Nicola Macé, who was famous for his comic poems. And he has made many films where you see his sense of humor coming out, which was also something very, very special to him. And so you have a man who had not only a very high standard of filmmaking, but also a large variety of subjects on which he made his films. And most of his films were, of course, black and white, but then he moved to color. That again was a big step for him, because working with black and white is not the same as working with color for a cinematographer, for a filmmaker. You have to take into account a lot of other things. But even that step he took forward and he went along. What made him an internationally well-known person, internationally famous person, is this international mind that he had, open to the world. You can't call him even an Indian filmmaker, he was a world filmmaker, to be classified with the masters of world cinema, because of this wideness of vision that he had. And strangely enough, he's appreciated much more outside his own country than he is in his own country. He's much better known in France, in the UK, in Italy, and far less in India. Everybody has heard of Satyajit Ray, everybody has probably read about him. Many have even seen a few films, but there are very few people who have actually seen his films and appreciate them for what they were. He's mostly known in Bengal, in the two Bengals, in Bangladesh and in West Bengal. He's not that well known through his works in his own country, but he is so well known outside his own country, and he continues to inspire new filmmakers. He continues to inspire the young generation of Bengali filmmakers. They always admit that somewhere they have paid a homage to him. There are some scenes or some films where they dedicate it to him. And they all say that he was like a film school that they went to by watching all his films. He still continues to inspire world filmmakers, and that's why it's so important that we celebrate his centenary, even though we are still in the middle of a pandemic. It would have been very different had this not happened. We would have done it in a bigger way, in a better way, but at least we are doing it in whatever way we can.